Elena Martinez counted the 3 silver coins in her palm for the 100th time that evening. Her fingers shook as she traced their edges, knowing these were all she had left in the world. The rent was overdue, the electricity would be cut off tomorrow, and her younger brother Miguel was dying in the hospital bed behind her. The doctor said there's nothing more they can do, she whispered to herself, watching Miguel's chest rise and fall weakly. The werewolf curse was eating him alive from the inside. His skin had turned gray and strange marks were appearing on his arms. Every day he got weaker, and every day Elena felt more helpless. She remembered when it happened 3 weeks ago. Miguel had been walking home from his job at the grocery store when a massive wolf attacked him in the alley behind their building. The beast had bitten him once on the shoulder before running away. At first they thought it was just a regular dog bite, but then Miguel started getting sick in ways that made no sense. The emergency room doctors were confused. His blood work showed things they'd never seen before. His temperature kept changing from ice cold to burning hot. Sometimes he would scream about hearing voices in his head. The regular medicines did nothing. That's when old Mrs. Chen from downstairs pulled Elena aside and told her the truth. That was no ordinary wolf, Mrs. Chen had said in her quiet voice. That was a cursed one. Your brother needs help from someone who understands these things. Elena had laughed at first. Werewolves weren't real. They were just stories in movies and books. But as Miguel got sicker and stranger things started happening around him, she began to believe. The way his eyes sometimes flashed yellow in the dark, the way he could hear conversations from 3 floors down, the way he begged her to stay away when the moon was bright. Mrs. Chen had given her an address written on a piece of old paper. There's a place, she said. Underground market. They sell things that regular stores don't have. Maybe you find help there, but be careful, child. That world is dangerous for people like us. Now Elena stood outside the address Mrs. Chen had given her. It looked like an abandoned warehouse in the worst part of town. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls, and not a single streetlight working. She clutched the 3 silver coins tighter. Mrs. Chen had told her that regular money wouldn't work in that place. Only silver coins had value there. A man in a long dark coat appeared from the shadows. He looked her up and down with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. You here for the market? He asked in a voice that sounded like gravel. Yes, Elena managed to say, even though every part of her wanted to run away. He opened a hidden door in the side of the building. First time cost 1 silver coin, he said, holding out his hand. Elena hesitated. Giving him 1 coin meant she'd only have 2 left for whatever she needed to buy. But Miguel was dying and she was out of options. She dropped 1 coin into his palm. The door led to a staircase going down into the earth. The walls were lined with strange symbols that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Other people were walking down the stairs too, but they didn't look entirely human. Some had eyes that reflected light like animals. Others moved too quietly for their size. A woman passed by with skin so pale it was almost blue. The marketplace opened up into a huge underground space. Dozens of stalls and shops were set up everywhere, selling things Elena had never imagined. Bottles filled with glowing liquid, cages with creatures that looked like they came from nightmares, books that whispered when you walked past them. And the smells were overwhelming, sweet and rotten and magical all at once. Elena wandered through the market, asking quietly about cures for werewolf curses. Most vendors just laughed at her, or quoted prices that were 10 times more than her 2 remaining coins. One old woman with silver hair told her what she needed. Werewolf curse can only be broken by alpha blood given willingly, the woman explained while organizing bottles of strange herbs. But good luck finding an alpha who wants to help a human. Most of them hate your kind. Where would I find an alpha? Elena asked desperately. The old woman pointed toward the back of the market. Tonight there's an auction. They're selling a captured one, but honey, that's going to cost more money than you've probably ever seen. Elena's heart sank, but she walked toward the auction area anyway. Maybe she could at least see what an alpha looked like. Maybe there would be some other way. The auction was being held in a circular area with raised seating around a central stage. Dozens of supernatural beings filled the seats, all of them looking wealthy and dangerous. Elena found a spot in the back where she could watch without drawing attention. They auctioned off several items first. A sword that could cut through any material went for 500 gold pieces. A potion that could make someone invisible for a week sold for 300 silver coins. Elena's 2 coins felt like nothing compared to these amounts. Then they brought out the alpha. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Even chained up and obviously beaten, he was the most magnificent person she'd ever seen. Tall and muscular with dark hair that fell across his face, but it was his eyes that stopped her heart, golden and fierce even in captivity. He looked proud despite the silver chains that were clearly hurting him. His wrists were burned where the metal touched his skin, but he stood straight and defiant. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, "we present Darius Blackthorne, pure-blood alpha werewolf, captured 3 days ago after months of tracking. Bidding starts at 1,000 gold pieces." The crowd erupted in excited murmurs. Elena watched in horror as the bids climbed rapidly. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. Wealthy vampires and other supernatural beings were treating him like a prize animal. She wanted to scream at them, but she was just one human in a room full of predators. The bidding reached 10,000 gold pieces, with 2 vampire clans competing against each other. Elena clutched her 2 silver coins and felt tears burning her eyes. She'd been foolish to think she could afford this. Miguel was going to die, and there was nothing she could do. Suddenly, a fight broke out between the 2 vampire groups. Accusations of cheating flew back and forth. Security guards rushed in to separate them. In the chaos, with everyone shouting and pushing, Elena found herself standing up. 3 silver coins, she yelled as loud as she could. The room went dead silent. Every supernatural being turned to stare at her. The auctioneer looked confused. The vampires looked insulted. And Darius Blackthorne looked directly at her with those golden eyes, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Did that human just bid 3 silver coins on a 10,000 gold piece item? Someone laughed. But the auctioneer, apparently wanting to end the chaos quickly, banged his gavel. "Sold to the human in the back!" Elena couldn't believe it. Neither could anyone else in the room. As security guards brought Darius toward her, she realized she had no idea what she was going to do next. She'd just bought a werewolf alpha with her last money, and now both their lives were about to change forever. The golden-eyed man looked at her as they put a leash in her hand attached to his chains. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked quietly. Elena met his gaze, thinking about Miguel dying in that hospital bed. "I bought hope," she said simply. And somehow, despite everything, Darius Blackthorne almost smiled. Elena's hands shook as she unlocked the door to her tiny apartment. She could feel Darius Blackthorne behind her, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a storm waiting to break. The silver chains around his wrists clinked softly with each step, and she winced every time she saw how the metal burned his skin. "This is it," she said nervously, pushing open the door to reveal her 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much. A small living room with a couch that had seen better days, a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person, and a bedroom she'd given to Miguel before he went to the hospital. "I know it's not what you're used to." Darius stepped inside and looked around with those intense golden eyes. "What I'm used to is running free through mountain forest with my pack," he said, his voice deep and rough. "This is definitely different." Elena closed the door and turned 3 different locks. The sound seemed to echo in the small space. She gestured toward the couch. "You can sit if you want. I need to figure out how to get those chains off you." "You can't," Darius said, but he sat down anyway, his large frame making her furniture look tiny. "They're enchanted silver. Only the person who put them on can remove them, or someone with very powerful magic." "Oh." Elena's heart sank. She hadn't thought about that. "I don't know anyone with magic." Darius studied her face. "Why did you buy me?" he asked directly. That was either very brave or very stupid. "I haven't decided which yet." Elena took a deep breath. She'd practiced this conversation in her head on the way home. But now that she was facing him, the words felt stuck in her throat. "My brother Miguel is dying. A werewolf attacked him 3 weeks ago, and now he has some kind of curse. Someone told me that only alpha blood given willingly can cure him." "A werewolf attacked your brother." Darius leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Where? When exactly?" "Behind our building. October 15th, around 9 at night. Miguel was coming home from work." Elena sat down in the chair across from him, keeping some distance. Even chained up, he radiated a kind of power that made her nervous. The wolf was huge. Gray and black fur. It bit him once and then disappeared. Darius's expression darkened. "That sounds like Victor. You know who attacked my brother?" "Victor Reeves used to be part of my pack. He went rogue about 6 months ago." Darius's hands clenched into fists, making the chains rattle. "He's been experimenting with dark magic, trying to create some kind of super werewolf army. I was hunting him when I got captured. Elena felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief that someone finally understood what had happened to Miguel. Fear because it sounded much worse than she'd imagined. Can you help him? Will you give me some of your blood to save him? Darius was quiet for a long moment, studying her face.
You spent everything you had to buy me, didn't you?
She nodded, embarrassed. Those 3 silver coins were all I had left. I couldn't pay rent this month, and the electricity will be cut off tomorrow. But Miguel is all the family I have. Our parents died in a car accident when he was 12. I've been taking care of him ever since. How old are you? 26. Miguel just turned 21 last month. Elena's voice caught a little. He was so excited about his birthday. He had all these plans for his life. He wanted to go to college, maybe become a teacher. Now he's in the hospital getting sicker every day, and the doctors think he's losing his mind. Darius stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the city lights. The chains made it hard for him to move naturally, but Elena could still see the strength in the way he carried himself. Victor's bite does more than just curse someone. It plants seeds of his influence in their mind. If we don't stop it soon, your brother won't just die, he'll become one of Victor's controlled wolves first. Controlled wolves? Werewolves who have lost their free will. They become like puppets, following Victor's commands without question. He's been building an army of them. Darius turned back to face her. I'll give you my blood to save your brother, but I want something in return. Elena's stomach tightened. She'd been afraid of this. I don't have any money left. I don't want money, Darius said. I want your help finding Victor. You know this city better than I do. You have connections in the human world that I don't. And you're the only person who's shown me kindness in the past 3 months. I'm just human, Elena protested. I don't know anything about fighting supernatural creatures. I'll probably just get in your way. You managed to buy an alpha werewolf at an underground auction with 3 silver coins, Darius pointed out. You're braver than you think. Elena looked at his burned wrists where the silver chains were cutting into his skin. Without thinking, she got up and went to her bathroom, coming back with a first aid kit. Let me at least clean those wounds, she said. Silver burns don't heal the same way as regular cuts, Darius warned. But he held out his hands anyway. Elena opened a bottle of antiseptic and soaked a cotton ball. This might sting a little more. When she touched the cotton to his burned skin, Darius hissed in pain, but he didn't pull away. Elena worked carefully, cleaning around the silver chains as best she could. She tried not to notice how warm his skin was, or the way his muscles tensed under her touch. Why were you hunting Victor alone? She asked, trying to distract both of them. Don't alphas usually travel in packs? My pack was killed, Darius said quietly. Victor betrayed us to hunters 6 months ago. 23 wolves died because I trusted him. Elena looked up from his wrists, seeing pain in his golden eyes that had nothing to do with the silver burns. I'm sorry. I should have seen the signs. Should have known he was planning something. Darius watched her work on his wounds. He always wanted to be alpha, but he wasn't strong enough to challenge me directly. So he found another way. That's not your fault, isn't it? I was their leader. I was supposed to protect them. Elena finished cleaning his wounds and wrapped soft bandages around his wrists, trying to create a barrier between his skin and the silver chains. It wouldn't heal the burns, but it might make them hurt less. My parents died because a drunk driver ran a red light, she said softly. For years, I blamed myself. If I hadn't asked them to pick me up from my friend's house that night, they would have been home safe. But it wasn't your fault. No, it wasn't. Just like your pack's death wasn't yours. Elena secured the bandages and sat back. Bad people make bad choices. We can't control that. We can only control how we respond. Darius flexed his fingers, testing the bandages. These feel better. Thank you. So, Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. If I help you find Victor, you'll give me enough blood to cure Miguel? Yes, but Elena... Darius leaned forward, his expression serious. This won't be easy. Victor is dangerous, and he has other werewolves working for him now. You could get hurt. You could die. Elena thought about Miguel lying in that hospital bed, getting weaker every day. She thought about the fear in his eyes when he begged her to stay away during the full moon. She thought about how he'd always protected her when they were younger, and how it was her turn to protect him now. When do we start? She asked. For the first time since she'd met him, Darius Blackthorne smiled. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less dangerous. We start tomorrow night. Victor will be hunting then. He always hunts when the moon is dark. Elena nodded, trying to ignore the voice in her head that told her she was about to get in way over her head. She'd already bought a Werewolf Alpha with her last 3 coins. How much crazier could her life get? As if he could read her thoughts, Darius's smile widened. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you? Probably not, Elena admitted. But Miguel is worth it. He's worth everything. Something shifted in Darius's golden eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. He's lucky to have a sister like you. Elena hoped she'd still feel that way when this was all over. Elena had never realized how different the city looked at night through the eyes of someone who was hunting. Walking beside Darius through the dark streets, she noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The way shadows moved in alleys, the sounds that weren't quite human coming from abandoned buildings, the fact that some people they passed had eyes that reflected streetlights like animals. How long have all these supernatural creatures been living here? She asked quietly as they made their way toward the warehouse district. Longer than humans have been keeping records, Darius replied, his head tilted as he listened to sounds she couldn't hear. We just hide better than humans realize. They'd spent the day preparing for this hunt. Elena had used her last few dollars to buy bolt cutters, which had finally freed Darius from those silver chains. She'd also called in sick to her job at the diner, knowing she couldn't explain why she needed time off to hunt a rogue werewolf. Darius had spent hours telling her everything he knew about Victor, his habits, his weaknesses, the way he thought. He likes to hunt in places where he won't be interrupted, Darius had explained. Abandoned buildings, construction sites, anywhere humans avoid after dark. He's building his army slowly, taking people who won't be missed right away. Now they were putting that knowledge to use. Elena led them through parts of the city she knew well from her years of taking shortcuts to avoid paying bus fare. Darius followed, his enhanced senses picking up trails that were invisible to her human eyes. This way, he said suddenly, turning down an alley between 2 empty office buildings. I can smell him. He was here recently. Elena wrinkled her nose. All she could smell was garbage and car exhaust. How recently? Within the past few hours. He's hunting tonight. Darius moved with a fluid grace that reminded Elena he wasn't entirely human. There's something else too. Another scent I recognize. They emerged from the alley into a small parking lot surrounded by chain-link fence. Several cars sat abandoned, their windows broken and tires flat. At the far end of the lot stood a 3-story building with most of its windows boarded up. Someone's in there, Darius said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I can hear heartbeats. At least 2 people, maybe more. Elena's own heartbeat picked up speed. Victor? And others. We need to be careful. If he's in there with members of his new pack, we could be outnumbered. They crept closer to the building, using the abandoned cars as cover. Elena tried to move as quietly as Darius did, but her sneakers seemed to crunch on every piece of broken glass in the parking lot. Darius shot her a look that was half amusement, half concern. Sorry, she whispered. I'm not really built for sneaking around. You're doing fine, he whispered back. Most humans sound like stampeding elephants to werewolf ears. You're more like a small pony. Despite her fear, Elena almost smiled. That's supposed to make me feel better? They reached the building and found a broken window on the ground floor that they could climb through. Darius went first, moving through the opening with liquid grace. Elena followed less gracefully, grateful for his strong hands helping her down on the other side. The inside of the building was dark and smelled of mold and decay. But underneath those scents, Elena could now detect something else, the metallic smell of blood. Her stomach turned. Darius's expression had gone completely serious. He held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet and still. They stood in the darkness for several minutes while he listened to sounds she couldn't hear. Finally, he leaned close to her ear. 3 werewolves upstairs, including Victor. 2 humans with them, but I think they're prisoners, not willing participants. His breath was warm against her ear, and Elena tried not to notice how that made her feel. We need to get the humans out first. How? There's a fire escape on the back of the building. If we can create a distraction down here, Victor will come to investigate. That might give you a chance to get the prisoners out through the back. Elena's mouth went dry. What kind of distraction? Darius smiled, and for a moment his teeth looked sharper than they should have. Leave that to me. But Elena, if something goes wrong, if Victor gets past me, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. Before she could argue, a scream echoed through the building from somewhere above them. It was a woman's voice filled with terror and pain. Elena started toward the stairs instinctively, but Darius caught her arm. Wait, he said firmly. Going in without a plan will just get us all killed. Another scream, this one weaker. Elena felt tears burning her eyes. We have to do something. We will. But we do it smart. Darius's golden eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Can you find the fire escape? Get to the back of the building and wait for my signal. What's your signal going to be? Darius's grin was all wolf. Trust me, you'll know. Elena wanted to argue, but another scream from upstairs decided her. She nodded and headed for the back of the building while Darius disappeared into the shadows near the staircase. She found the fire escape exactly where he'd said it would be. The metal ladder was rusted and looked like it might not hold her weight, but it was better than nothing. Elena climbed carefully to the second floor and found an open window. The building was eerily quiet now. No more screams. No sounds of movement. Elena positioned herself by the window and waited, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. Then Darius's signal came, and it was impossible to miss. A roar echoed through the building that didn't sound entirely human. It was followed by the sounds of breaking wood, shattering glass, and growls that raised the hair on Elena's arms. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs, and she heard Victor's voice shouting orders to his pack members. Elena climbed through the window and found herself in a hallway lined with doors. She could hear crying coming from behind one of them. Hello? She called softly. I'm here to help. Where are you? Here, a woman's voice called. Please help us. Elena followed the voice to a door that was locked from the outside with a heavy bolt. She slid it open and found two women inside, one young, maybe in her 20s, and one older. Both looked terrified and hurt, with cuts and bruises covering their arms. I'm getting you out of here, Elena said quickly. Can you both walk? I think so, the younger woman said. But there are werewolves in this building. We can't just walk out the front door. I know. We're going out the back. Come on. Elena led them to the fire escape, helping the injured older woman climb down first. The sounds of fighting from inside the building were getting louder. Glass was breaking, and she could hear Darius's roar mixing with Victor's snarls. Just as Elena was helping the second woman onto the fire escape, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. She turned to see a young man with yellow eyes and extended fangs rushing toward her, one of Victor's pack members. Without thinking, Elena grabbed a broken piece of wooden beam from the floor and swung it as hard as she could. It connected with the werewolf's head with a solid crack, and he stumbled backward, giving her enough time to dive through the window onto the fire escape. Go, 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 she yelled to the two women who were already climbing down as fast as they could. They reached the ground just as an explosion of sound came from the front of the building. Elena looked around the corner to see Darius backing out of the front entrance, blood on his shirt and his eyes glowing golden in the streetlight. Victor followed him along with two other werewolves. Victor was bigger than Elena had expected, with silver-streaked hair and scars across his face. You always were too sentimental, Darius. Victor called out as they circled each other in the parking lot. Caring about humans will be your downfall. Caring about anything was never your problem, Darius replied, never taking his eyes off the other wolves. That's what made you weak. Elena made sure the two rescued women were safely hidden behind a car before she crept closer to watch the confrontation. She wanted to help somehow, but she didn't know how. All she had was the piece of wood she'd grabbed upstairs. Victor lunged at Darius, moving with inhuman speed. But Darius was ready for him. They collided in a tangle of claws and teeth, rolling across the broken asphalt. The other two werewolves started to circle around them, looking for an opening to jump in. Elena saw her chance. She ran toward the nearest werewolf and swung her makeshift weapon at his knees. He went down hard, giving Darius the opening he needed to throw Victor off and focus on the remaining threat. I told you to run, Darius said as he grappled with the last werewolf. I don't take orders very well, Elena replied, looking around for Victor, who had disappeared into the shadows. I noticed that about you, Darius said, and even in the middle of a fight she could hear the affection in his voice. They found Victor trying to escape through a hole in the chain-link fence. Together, Elena and Darius cornered him, and she realized that somewhere during this crazy night they'd become a team. They moved together like they'd been partners for years instead of days. This isn't over, Victor snarled as Darius knocked him unconscious. There are others like me. Others who believe werewolves should rule, not hide. But for tonight it was over. Elena looked at Darius, both of them breathing hard and covered in dirt and blood, and realized something important had changed between them. They weren't just allies of convenience anymore. They were partners. Elena should have known it was too easy. After capturing Victor 3 nights ago, she and Darius had interrogated him for hours. The rogue werewolf had eventually given them an address, an abandoned pharmaceutical laboratory on the outskirts of the city, where he claimed to be conducting his experiments. He'd been too cooperative, Elena realized now, too willing to give them exactly what they wanted. This feels like a trap, she said as they approached the lab complex in the early morning darkness. The building looked innocent enough from the outside, just another empty, industrial facility with broken windows and weeds growing through, cracks in the parking lot. Everything feels like a trap when you're hunting. Something dangerous, Darius replied, but his golden eyes were scanning their surroundings constantly. Victor's been locked up for 3 days. His pack members are probably scattered by now. Elena wanted to believe him, but something felt wrong. The building was too quiet. No sounds of machinery, no voices, no signs of life at all. Maybe we should wait until daylight? Your brother doesn't have time for us to be cautious, Darius reminded her gently. The curse is getting stronger every day. We saw that when we visited him yesterday. Elena's heart clenched, remembering Miguel's condition at the hospital. The curse was progressing faster now. His skin had taken on a strange grayish tint, and he kept talking about voices in his head telling him to do things. The doctors were completely baffled and had started talking about transferring him to a psychiatric facility. You're right, she said, checking the bag of supplies they'd brought. Holy water that Mrs. Chen had given them, iron filings, and a small silver knife that Darius had insisted she carry for protection. Let's get this over with. They found an unlocked service entrance on the side of the building. Darius went first, moving silently through the dark corridors while Elena followed, trying not to trip over debris scattered across the floor. The smell inside was awful, chemicals mixed with something organic and rotten that made her stomach turn. Laboratories this way, Darius whispered, following Victor's directions. They climbed a staircase to the second floor and found themselves in a hallway lined with doors. Most of the rooms were empty, filled with broken equipment and old papers scattered everywhere. But the room at the end of the hall was different. Elena heard the sounds before she saw anything, low moaning and the rattle of chains. When Darius pushed open the door, she gasped. The room had been converted into some kind of prison. Heavy cages lined the walls and most of them were occupied. Oh my God, Elena breathed, rushing toward the nearest cage. Inside was a young man about Miguel's age, his clothes torn and his skin covered with the same grayish tint her brother was developing. His eyes were yellow instead of human brown, and when he saw her, he snarled like an animal. Don't get too close, Darius warned, but his voice was thick with emotion. Victor's been turning people. These are new werewolves, but something's wrong with the transformation. Elena counted 12 cages, all of them occupied. The people inside looked like they were caught between human and wolf form, their faces partially elongated, their fingers ending in claws, their teeth sharp and prominent. But worst of all, their eyes were empty of intelligence or personality. They moved like puppets without a puppeteer. This is what would have happened to Miguel, she realized, horror washing over her. This is what Victor wanted to do to everyone, Darius said grimly. He was examining some papers on a desk near the window. These notes. He wasn't just making werewolves. He was making soldiers. Look at this. Elena joined him at the desk, trying to ignore the sounds from the cages behind them. The papers were covered with Victor's handwriting, detailing experiments and formulas. But what made her blood run cold were the maps. City maps marked with locations throughout the metropolitan area, water treatment plants, subway stations, shopping centers. He was planning to release something into the water supply, Elena said, reading over his shoulder. A modified version of the werewolf curse, Darius confirmed. One that would transform people instantly instead of over several weeks. And from the look of these subjects, the transformed wouldn't retain their free will. An army of controlled werewolves, Elena said quietly. He could have taken over the entire city. Could have? A familiar voice said from behind them. Oh, I still can. Elena spun around to see Victor standing in the doorway, very much not locked up where they'd left him. He was smiling, and his eyes were glowing with an unnatural light. Behind him stood 6 more werewolves, all with the same empty, controlled expressions as the people in the cages. How did you escape? Darius demanded, moving to stand between Victor and Elena. I didn't escape, Victor laughed. You never captured me. Did you really think I would let myself be taken that easily? The Victor you caught was my brother Leon, under a glamour spell to look like me. He was always willing to do anything for his big brother. Elena's mind raced. If they'd had the wrong person for 3 days, then Victor had been free to continue his plans. The address he gave us was exactly where I wanted you to come, Victor confirmed. You walked right into my trap. Though I have to admit, I'm impressed that a human figured out so much from my notes. You're almost too smart for your own good. The werewolves behind Victor spread out, blocking the only exit from the room. Elena reached for the silver knife in her bag, but Victor made a clicking sound with his tongue. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he said. You see, I have something you want very badly. Victor stepped aside, and 2 more of his werewolves entered the room. Between them, they carried an unconscious young man. Elena's heart stopped. Miguel, she whispered. Her brother was pale and thin, looking even worse than when she'd seen him at the hospital. The grayish tint to his skin was more pronounced now, and she could see the bite mark on his shoulder had spread into a web of dark veins under his skin. Took him right out of that hospital, Victor said casually. Amazing how easy it is to walk past human security when you can cloud their minds. Miguel's transformation is almost complete now. In a few hours he'll be just like my other soldiers, strong, obedient, and completely under my control. Let him go, Elena said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. Your fight is with me, not him. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Victor replied. My fight is with humans in general. You've spent centuries thinking you're the dominant species on this planet. It's time for that to change. Darius moved slightly, and Elena could see him calculating distances, looking for a way to get them out of this situation. But they were outnumbered 8-2, and Victor's werewolves were positioned perfectly to prevent any escape attempts. What do you want? Darius asked. Simple, Victor said. I want you to watch your little human friend choose between saving her brother and saving the city. You see, I've prepared a special dose of my serum just for Miguel. 1 injection, and he completes his transformation immediately. He becomes my perfect soldier, and I let both of you live to see what happens next. Victor held up a syringe filled with glowing green liquid. Or she can try to save him, in which case I release my enhanced werewolf curse into the city's water supply tonight instead of waiting for next week. Either way, I win. Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. Save Miguel and doom thousands of innocent people, or save the city and watch her brother become a monster. It was an impossible choice. There's a third option, Darius said quietly. Victor raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what would that be? Elena saves Miguel, saves the city, and I tear your throat out before you can stop either one. Victor laughed. You're outnumbered 8-2, and half of your team is human. Those aren't very good odds. You're forgetting something, Elena said suddenly, her hand closing around something in her bag. I bought him at an auction for 3 silver coins. That makes me very good at doing impossible things. She threw the iron filings directly into the faces of the nearest werewolves, while Darius lunged at Victor. The room exploded into chaos with snarling wolves and breaking furniture filling the air. Elena dove toward Miguel, but one of Victor's soldiers caught her arm. She twisted away and pulled out Mrs. Chen's holy water, splashing it across the werewolf's face. He screamed and let go, giving her the seconds she needed to reach her brother. Miguel, she said, shaking him gently. Miguel, wake up. His eyes opened, and for a moment they were his normal brown instead of the yellow she'd been expecting. Elena, he whispered. How did I get here? The last thing I remember was being in the hospital. It's okay, Elena said, helping him sit up. We're going to get you out of here. But even as she said it, she could see Darius struggling against Victor and his remaining pack members. The silver knife felt small and useless in her hand. They were still trapped, Miguel was still cursed, and Victor was still planning to destroy the city. Elena looked at her brother's trusting face and made a decision that would change everything. Miguel, she said quietly, I need you to trust me no matter what happens next. And then she did something that she hoped wouldn't get them all killed. Elena had never believed in magic, but desperation had a way of making believers out of skeptics. with Victor advancing toward her and Miguel, and Darius fighting for his life against 4 werewolves on the other side of the room. Elena pulled out the one thing she hadn't told anyone about. Hidden in the deepest pocket of her bag was her grandmother's old ring, a simple silver band with strange symbols carved around it that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in her family. Her grandmother had died when Elena was 12, but she remembered the old woman's stories about their family's connection to the supernatural world, stories Elena had dismissed as the fantasies of an aging mind. But her grandmother had made her promise to wear the ring if she ever found herself in real trouble with things that weren't quite human. Elena slipped the ring onto her finger just as Victor reached for Miguel with that glowing green syringe. The moment the silver touched her skin, everything changed. Power flooded through Elena's body like electricity, but it wasn't just her own power. Somehow she could feel Darius across the room, his strength, his pain, his desperate fear for her safety. Their minds connected in a way that should have been impossible, and suddenly she understood things she'd never known before. The mate bond. She'd read about it in one of the supernatural books Mrs. Chen had lent her, but she'd thought it was just werewolf mythology. The idea that 2 souls could be so perfectly matched that they became connected on a supernatural level seemed too impossible to be real. But now she could feel it forming between them, sparked by their shared danger and her desperate need to protect everyone she cared about. The ring on her finger was glowing with the same golden light as Darius's eyes, and she realized her grandmother had been much more than just a storyteller. "What's happening to you?" Victor demanded, backing away as Elena stood up. The air around her was shimmering like heat waves, and she could feel power flowing through her veins like liquid fire. "I'm saving my brother," Elena said, and her voice echoed strangely in the room. "And I'm saving this city. And I'm saving the man I love." Victor's eyes widened. "That's not possible. Humans can't form mate bonds with werewolves. The magic isn't strong enough." "Maybe most humans can't," Elena agreed, raising her hand toward him. Golden light streamed from her fingers, and Victor's werewolves began backing away in fear. "But my grandmother wasn't most humans, and neither am I." Across the room, Elena felt Darius's amazement and wonder through their newly formed connection. The bond was giving him strength too, healing his injuries and amplifying his natural werewolf abilities. He fought with renewed vigor, taking down Victor's soldiers one by one. But Victor wasn't finished. With a snarl of rage, he lunged at Miguel with the syringe raised. Elena reacted instinctively, throwing up a shield of golden energy that stopped Victor in midair and sent him crashing into the wall of cages. The impact broke open several cage doors, and Victor's experimental werewolves began stumbling out. But instead of attacking Elena and the others, they seemed confused and disoriented, as if they were waking up from a deep sleep. The connection, Elena realized, understanding flowing through the mate bond from Darius's knowledge. Victor was controlling them through dark magic, but the bond is breaking his hold. She could feel it happening, the golden energy flowing from her, and Darius was somehow purifying the corrupted werewolf magic that Victor had been using. The experimental subjects were becoming more human-looking by the minute, their eyes clearing and their claws retracting. "This is impossible," Victor raged, pulling himself up from the wreckage of broken cages. "I've spent years perfecting this magic. You can't just undo it with some flashy light show." "Watch me," Elena said. She knelt beside Miguel, placing her hands on his chest where the curse marks were spreading under his skin. The mate bond poured healing energy through her, and she watched the dark veins begin to fade. Miguel's skin returned to its normal color, and when his eyes opened, they were brown instead of yellow. "Elena," he said weakly, "what's happening?" "I feel different. Better." "The curse is broken," Elena said, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're going to be okay." But Victor wasn't giving up. With a roar of fury, he began changing into his wolf form. Not the controlled transformation Elena had seen before, but something wild and desperate. His body grew larger and more twisted than any natural wolf, powered by the dark magic he'd been experimenting with. "If I can't have my army," he snarled through elongated jaws, "then I'll settle for killing all of you." Elena stood up to face him, but she wasn't alone. Darius appeared beside her, his own transformation flowing smoothly as he shifted into his alpha wolf form. But he wasn't the only one. The experimental subjects Victor had been controlling were changing too. but their transformations looked healthy and natural now that they were free of his influence. You made one mistake. Victor, Darius said, his voice carrying the authority of a true alpha. You forgot that real strength comes from protecting others, not controlling them. The fight that followed was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. Victor, in his twisted wolf form, was incredibly strong and vicious. But he was facing not just Darius, but a whole pack of werewolves who were fighting for their freedom, plus a newly awakened witch whose power was connected to the most legendary alpha in the region. Elena discovered that the mate bond didn't just connect her emotionally to Darius, it allowed her to support him in battle, lending her energy to his strength and providing strategic insights through their mental link. She could see the fight from multiple perspectives, anticipating Victor's moves and guiding the other werewolves through telepathic nudges. When Victor finally fell, defeated by the combined efforts of everyone he'd tried to control or destroy, Elena felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. The golden energy gradually faded from around her, but the connection to Darius remained, warm and constant, like having a piece of him permanently settled in her heart. Is it over? Miguel asked, looking around at the room full of people who were slowly returning to human form. This part is, Darius said, changing back to human shape and moving to stand beside Elena. But we need to make sure Victor didn't have other facilities, other experiments running. Elena nodded, then looked at her brother. Miguel, there's something you should know. About what happened to you and about what I am now. You mean the magic? Miguel smiled weakly. Elena, I could feel it when you healed me. I know you're not just human anymore, but you're still my sister and you still saved my life. We saved each other, Elena corrected, looking at Darius and the group of people they'd rescued. All of us. One of Victor's former prisoners, a woman about Elena's age, stepped forward hesitantly. What happens to us now? We're werewolves, but we don't have a pack. We don't know how to live like this. Elena looked at Darius, feeling his thoughts through their bond. You do have a pack, she said. If you want one. Darius lost his family, but that doesn't mean he can't build a new one. And I think I'm part of that family now, too. Darius took her hand, and Elena felt the rightness of it through every fiber of her being. The mate bond wasn't just about magical power or supernatural connections. It was about finding the person who completed you, who made you stronger and braver and more yourself than you'd ever been alone. Are you sure about this? Darius asked quietly. Being bonded to an alpha werewolf isn't going to be an ordinary life. Elena looked around the room at the people they'd saved, at her brother who was alive and healthy, at the man whose golden eyes held promises of adventures she couldn't even imagine yet. I stopped, wanting an ordinary life the night I bought you with 3 silver coins, she said. And when Darius smiled and pulled her into his arms, Elena knew that her real story was just beginning. Elena discovered that saving the city from a rogue werewolf's army came with unexpected complications. 3 days after Victor's defeat, she was sitting in her tiny apartment trying to figure out how to explain to her boss at the diner why she'd been missing work, when a knock came at her door. Not the normal knock of a neighbor or delivery person, but something that made the windows rattle and sent shivers down her spine. Elena, Darius called from the kitchen where he'd been helping Miguel eat soup. Don't answer that, but it was too late. Elena had already opened the door and found herself face to face with 3 people who definitely weren't human. The woman in front was tall and elegant, with pale skin and eyes that were too blue to be natural. Her companions, a man with silver hair and another woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms, flanked her like bodyguards. Elena Martinez, the pale woman said in a voice like silk over steel. I am Celestine Moreau, representative of the Midnight Court. We need to discuss the matter of your recent purchase. Elena's heart sank. She'd been hoping the supernatural community would forget about the auction. But apparently 3 silver coins didn't buy anonymity along with a werewolf alpha. If this is about money, Elena began, but Celestine held up a perfectly manicured hand. This is about much more than money, child. You disrupted a very expensive auction, cost several of our members significant investments, and then proceeded to wage war against one of our registered vendors. Victor was hardly a registered vendor, Darius said, appearing behind Elena with Miguel close behind him. He was a rogue werewolf conducting illegal experiments. Celestine's 2 blue eyes fixed on Darius with obvious distaste. Darius Blackthorn. We heard about your dramatic return to the living, and your new attachment. The way she said the word attachment made Elena's skin crawl. Through the mate bond, she could feel Darius's tension and barely controlled anger. The mate bond is not an attachment, Darius said calmly, and Elena is under my protection now. That makes her off limits to the Midnight Court's interference. Does it? Celestine smiled, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp. The girl is human. Mostly human anyway. Our laws regarding supernatural human relationships are quite clear. What laws? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Humans who become romantically involved with supernatural beings must be registered with the court, the silver-haired man explained. For their own protection, of course. And for the protection of our community's secrets. Miguel stepped forward, and Elena was surprised by the steadiness in his voice. What kind of registration? Magical monitoring, the tattooed woman said. Memory modification when necessary. Behavioral restrictions. Standard procedure for keeping the supernatural world hidden from human authorities. Elena felt Darius's fury through their bond and put a hand on his arm to keep him from doing something that would make their situation worse. And if I refuse to register? Celestine's smile widened. That would be most unwise. The court has many ways of ensuring compliance. The court also has many enemies, a new voice said from behind the three representatives. Elena turned to see Mrs. Chen climbing the stairs to her apartment, moving with more energy than Elena had ever seen from the elderly woman. Mrs. Chen? Elena said, confused. Mei Chen. Celestine's voice had lost its silky tone. I should have known you'd be involved in this mess. Elena stared at her elderly neighbor, who suddenly seemed much more formidable than the woman who brought her homemade soup when she was sick. You know each other? Oh yes, Mrs. Chen said, stopping beside Elena. Celestine and I go way back. Don't we, dear? Ancient history, Celestine said dismissively, but Elena could hear the tension in her voice. Mrs. Chen, Miguel said quietly. What's going on? The elderly woman smiled at him with genuine affection. I'm what you might call a retired witch, sweetheart. And these three are what you might call trouble. Elena's head was spinning. First, she discovered she had magical abilities inherited from her grandmother. Now her downstairs neighbor was apparently a witch too. Is everyone in my life secretly supernatural? Just the interesting ones, Mrs. Chen replied cheerfully. Now then, Celestine, I believe you were threatening my young friends here. The court's business is not your concern anymore, May. Anything that happens in my building is my concern. And Elena is under my protection as well as Darius's. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman who'd helped her find the supernatural market in the first place. But she also felt the weight of all these people making decisions about her life without asking her opinion. Stop, she said firmly, and everyone turned to look at her. All of you. I appreciate the protection, but I can speak for myself. She stepped forward to face Celestine directly. I'm not registering with your court. I'm not accepting magical monitoring or memory modification. And I'm definitely not letting you put behavioral restrictions on me. Elena, Darius said quietly. You don't understand how powerful the court is. I understand that they're trying to intimidate me in my own home, Elena replied. And I don't respond well to intimidation. Celestine laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You have spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit won't protect you from the consequences of defying the court. Maybe not, Elena agreed. But this will. She held up her hand, letting her grandmother's ring catch the light. The symbols carved around the band began to glow softly, and Celestine took a step backward. Impossible, the silver-haired man breathed. That's a founding ring. A what now? Miguel asked. Mrs. Chen looked impressed. Your grandmother was a founding witch, Elena. One of the original supernatural beings who created the treaty between our world and the human world centuries ago. That ring gives you rights and protections that supersede the court's authority. Elena stared at the ring on her finger, thinking about her grandmother's stories that she'd dismissed as fantasy. She tried to tell me, didn't she? About our family's history. Founding witches and their descendants are considered neutral parties in supernatural politics, Mrs. Chen explained. The court can't touch you without risking war with every other supernatural faction. Celestine's perfect composure was starting to crack. The founding families died out generations ago. Apparently not, Darius said. And Elena could feel his pride and amazement through their bond. This doesn't end here, Celestine warned. backing toward the stairs with her companions. "The court will be watching you, Elena Martinez. All of you." After they left, Elena sank down onto her couch, suddenly exhausted. Does anyone else feel like their life has gotten completely out of control? "Welcome to the supernatural world," Mrs. Chen said kindly. "It's never boring." Miguel sat down beside his sister. "So let me get this straight. You're a witch from some ancient magical family. Darius is a werewolf alpha. Mrs. Chen is also a witch. And there's some kind of supernatural government that wants to control your life. That's about the size of it." Elena confirmed. "And you're planning to fight all of them if necessary to stay free?" "Pretty much," Miguel grinned. "Cool. When do I learn magic?" "You don't," Elena and Darius said at the same time, then looked at each other in surprise. "The magical ability seems to skip generations in your family," Mrs. Chen explained to Miguel. "But don't worry, dear. Being the normal one has its advantages. Someone needs to keep these two grounded." That night, as Elena lay in Darius's arms in the bed they'd started sharing, she thought about how much her life had changed. A week ago, her biggest worry had been paying rent. Now she was apparently some kind of supernatural nobility with a werewolf mate and enemies in high places. "Are you having second thoughts?" Darius asked quietly, his arm tightening around her. "About which part? The magic, the mate bond, or the fact that we seem to be collecting enemies faster than allies?" "Any of it." "All of it?" Elena considered the question seriously. Through their bond, she could feel Darius's worry that she might decide this life was too complicated, too dangerous, that she might choose safety over love. "I spent 26 years living a small, safe, ordinary life," she said finally. "I worked at a diner, paid my bills, took care of Miguel, and never expected anything exciting to happen to me. Do you know how that felt?" "Tell me." "Like I was sleepwalking. Like I was waiting for my real life to start." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "This is my real life. You, Miguel, Mrs. Chen. Even the supernatural politics and the people who want to control me. For the first time ever, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Darius kissed her forehead. "Even if it means fighting the most powerful supernatural organization in the country?" Elena smiled. "Especially if it means that. I bought you with 3 silver coins, remember? I'm apparently very good at taking on impossible odds." "We both are," Darius agreed, "and we're not doing it alone anymore." Through their bond, Elena felt his love and determination, and she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Her grandmother's ring glowed softly on her finger, a reminder that she came from a long line of strong women who had never backed down from a fight. The supernatural world had no idea what it was dealing with. Elena had always thought the supernatural world would be the most dangerous thing she'd ever encounter. She was wrong. The phone call came at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after their confrontation with the midnight court. Elena jolted awake as Darius answered his cell phone with a tense, "What is it?" Through their mate bond, she felt his shock and anger before she heard his words. "They took Caitlin and James," he said, sitting up in bed. "And Tony and Rebecca." Elena's blood ran cold. Those were 4 of the werewolves they'd rescued from Victor's laboratory. People who'd been staying in the safe house Darius had established across town while they recovered from their traumatic transformations. "Who took them?" Elena asked, already reaching for her clothes. "That's the problem. Nobody knows." Darius was getting dressed with efficient movements, his face grim. There were no supernatural scents at the scene. No magical residue. Whoever did this was completely human. An hour later, they stood in the empty safe house with Mrs. Chen and Miguel surveying the scene. The place had been ransacked with military precision. Furniture overturned, but nothing stolen. Windows broken from the outside, but no signs of a struggle inside. "They were taken while they slept," Mrs. Chen said, examining scorch marks on the wall. "Some kind of gas was used to knock them unconscious first." "Gas," Elena repeated thoughtfully. "That's not supernatural. That's scientific." Miguel was looking at something near the door. "Elena, come look at this." She joined him and saw what he'd found. A small electronic device no bigger than a quarter tucked under the doorframe. "What is it?" "Surveillance equipment," Miguel said, surprising her. "High-tech stuff. I've seen similar devices in security magazines." He'd been reading everything he could about the supernatural world since his recovery. But apparently he'd been researching the regular world too. Darius examined the device without touching it. "They've been watching us. But why take werewolves? What could humans want with supernatural beings?" Elena felt a chill of recognition. Victor mentioned something during his rants about being funded by someone. What if it wasn't just one rogue werewolf conducting experiments? You think there's an organization? Mrs. Chen asked. I think there's been an organization all along, Elena said, pieces clicking together in her mind. Victor was working for humans who wanted to weaponize werewolves. When we stopped him, they lost their source, so now they're collecting test subjects directly. Over the next few days, their worst fears were confirmed. 3 more safe houses were hit. 2 independent werewolf packs reported missing members. Even some of the court's people started disappearing. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just their small group of rescued werewolves. Elena threw herself into investigating with a determination that worried even Darius. She spent hours online, following threads of information that connected military contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and government black budget projects. The mate bond let Darius feel her growing exhaustion, but also her fierce protectiveness toward the people they'd saved. Found something, she announced on the 4th night, looking up from her laptop with tired but excited eyes. The others gathered around as Elena pulled up a series of documents she'd managed to access through some creative hacking, a skill she'd apparently inherited along with her magical abilities. Prometheus Labs, she said, pointing to the screen. A private military contractor that's been receiving funding from a classified Defense Department project called Operation Lycanthrope. Lycanthrope, Darius said grimly. That's an old word for werewolf. The project leader is General Harrison, Elena continued. His son was killed in a werewolf attack 5 years ago. Random encounter with a rogue wolf in Alaska. Since then, Harrison's been convinced that werewolves and other supernatural beings are a national security threat. Miguel leaned over her shoulder to read the documents. So he's kidnapping supernatural people to experiment on them? Worse than that, Elena said, clicking to another page. He's trying to create super soldiers, humans with supernatural abilities but completely under military control. Mrs. Chen made a disgusted sound. He's repeating Victor's mistakes on a much larger scale. And he has government backing, Darius added. That's why there were no supernatural scents at the safe house. His people are all human military personnel. Elena felt a familiar surge of determination, the same feeling she'd had when she decided to spend her last 3 coins on a werewolf alpha. We have to stop him, Elena, Darius said carefully. This isn't like fighting Victor or standing up to the Midnight Court. This is the United States military. They have resources we can't even imagine. They have my friends, Elena said firmly. Caitlin was just starting to smile again. James was talking about going back to college. Tony and Rebecca were falling in love. These are good people who've been through enough trauma already. Through their bond, Darius felt her pain and her resolve. These weren't just random supernatural beings to Elena. They were her pack, her family. And she would do anything to protect them. Then we get help, he said. We can't do this alone. That's how Elena found herself sitting in an abandoned subway station 3 nights later, surrounded by the most unlikely alliance she could have imagined. Celestine and 2 other court representatives sat across from Darius and his small pack. Mrs. Chen had brought 3 other elderly witches who looked like they could demolish buildings with their minds. Even some of the independent supernatural beings from the underground market had shown up. General Harrison's operation is a threat to all of us, Celestine said, her usual arrogance replaced by genuine concern. If he succeeds in creating controllable supernatural soldiers, he'll move to eliminate the rest of us as security risks. An old vampire with scars across his face nodded grimly. We've survived centuries by staying hidden, but hiding won't work against an enemy who already knows we exist and has military-grade technology to track us. What do you propose? Darius asked. Elena stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. I propose we use the one advantage we have that they don't expect. Which is? Elena smiled, thinking of all the impossible things she'd accomplished in the past month. They think they understand us. They see werewolves as just strong humans with fangs. They see witches as humans with party tricks. They see vampires as predictable predators. And they see you as just a human who got lucky, Mrs. Chen added with a knowing smile. Exactly. They have no idea what we can do when we work together. Elena looked around the room at supernatural beings who had been enemies an hour ago and were now united by necessity. Harrison's strength is organization and technology. Ours is magic and the bonds between us. The mate bond, Celestine said thoughtfully. It's not just between you and Darius, is it? I can feel it connecting to others in your pack. Elena nodded. It's growing. Every person we save, every life we protect, adds to the network. Mrs. Chen says it's because of my founding witch heritage. I can create bonds of loyalty and protection that are stronger than anything normal magic can produce. One of the independent werewolves, a woman named Luna, leaned forward. You're talking about a psychic network. All of us connected, able to coordinate perfectly. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Elena confirmed. Harrison's people might have superior firepower, but they don't have what we have. The ability to fight as one coordinated unit with shared strength and shared purpose. Darius felt Elena's plan forming through their bond, and his pride in her strategic thinking mixed with his fear for her safety. It's dangerous. If the network is centered on you, and something happens to you, then you'll all have to make sure nothing happens to me, Elena said simply. The rescue mission they planned was the most complex thing Elena had ever been part of. 3 teams hitting 3 different Prometheus Labs facilities simultaneously, with Elena's growing psychic network coordinating their movements. It should have been impossible. Supernatural beings who had been enemies for centuries working together with military precision. But Elena had learned that impossible was just another word for challenging. The night of the mission, as she stood on a rooftop overlooking the main Prometheus Labs facility with Darius and their team, Elena felt the network humming with shared determination. Dozens of supernatural beings all connected through her, all ready to risk everything to save people they barely knew. You ready for this? Darius asked, checking his equipment one last time. Elena thought about Caitlin's shy smile, James's dream of going back to college, Tony and Rebecca's newfound love. She thought about Miguel safe at home with Mrs. Chen, and about all the other innocent people who would be hurt if Harrison succeeded. I've been ready for this my whole life, she said. I just didn't know it until now. And as they moved into action, Elena realized that buying a werewolf alpha with 3 silver coins had been just the beginning. Tonight, she was going to save her family and change the balance of power between the human and supernatural worlds forever. The question was whether she'd survive to see the results. Elena had never imagined that saving the world would involve so much crawling through air vents. The Prometheus Labs facility was a fortress of steel and concrete, but even the most secure building had weaknesses if you knew where to look. And when you had a psychic network of supernatural beings working together, you found those weaknesses very quickly. Through her connection to the other teams, Elena could feel their progress. Celestine's vampires had disabled the security systems at the eastern facility. Mrs. Chen's witches were creating diversions at the northern location, and here at the main laboratory, Elena and Darius were working their way through the building's infrastructure toward the detention level where their friends were being held. Next junction, turn left, Elena whispered into her headset, coordinating with Luna's team, who were approaching from the opposite direction. The psychic network let her see through multiple sets of eyes at once, creating a 3-dimensional map of the entire facility in her mind. How many guards? Darius asked quietly as they reached the edge of the ventilation system. Elena extended her senses through the network, gathering information from everyone connected to her. 12 on this floor. But Darius, there's something else. I can feel the missing werewolves, but their minds are wrong, changed. Through their mate bond, Darius felt her horror and understanding. Harrison's been experimenting on them. We're going to save them, Elena said fiercely. All of them. They dropped down into a corridor lined with heavy steel doors. Each door had a small window, and what Elena saw through them made her sick with rage. The missing supernatural beings were strapped to medical tables, connected to machines she didn't recognize. But worst of all, their eyes were vacant, the same empty expression she'd seen on Victor's controlled wolves. They're turning them into soldiers, Darius said grimly, his hands clenching into fists. Not if I can help it, Elena replied. She pressed her hands against the nearest door and extended her power through the psychic network. The bonds she'd been building weren't just for communication. They were for healing, for breaking through mental controls, for restoring the connections between souls that made people truly alive. Golden light flowed from her fingers into the steel door and beyond, reaching the werewolf strapped inside. Through the network, she felt his mind stirring, fighting against the artificial controls Harrison's people had imposed. "James," she whispered, and saw his eyes clear as his true self pushed through the programming. One by one, she broke the mental controls holding their friends captive, but the effort was draining her quickly, and she could feel Darius's concern through their bond. "Elena, you can't free them all at once. It's too much power." "I have to try," she said, moving to the next door. "Harrison's here somewhere. I can feel him watching through security cameras. If he realizes what we're doing, he'll trigger some kind of failsafe." Alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility, red lights flashing in the corridors. Through the psychic network, Elena felt the other teams encountering heavy resistance as military personnel flooded into the buildings. "So much for stealth," Darius muttered, his form already beginning to shift as he prepared for a fight. Elena pressed her hands against another door, pouring more energy into freeing Caitlin. The young woman's eyes cleared just as soldiers rounded the corner at the end of the hallway. "Weapons raised. Luna's team is pinned down," Elena reported. Her voice strained from the effort of maintaining so many psychic connections at once. "The vampires are holding their position, but they're outnumbered." Darius, now in his full wolf form, positioned himself between Elena and the approaching soldiers. But these weren't ordinary military personnel. They moved with inhuman speed and coordination, and their eyes had the same vacant look as the controlled supernatural beings. "They've been experimenting on their own people too," Elena realized with horror. The enhanced soldiers opened fire, but their bullets were stopped by a shimmering barrier that appeared around Elena and Darius. Through the network, Elena felt Mrs. Chen's witches lending their power to protect them from a distance. "Keep freeing the prisoners." Darius's voice came through their bond as he engaged the soldiers in combat. "I'll hold them off." Elena forced herself to focus on the next door, even as the sound of fighting filled the corridor around her. Tony's mind was harder to reach. Harrison's people had done more extensive work on him. But Elena refused to give up, pouring more of herself into the connection until she felt his personality resurface. "Elena?" Tony's confused voice came from behind the door. "What's happening?" "Where am I?" "You're safe now," Elena promised, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "Can you change? Can you shift?" I think so." "Then get ready to fight. We're getting everyone out of here." As Elena moved to the next door, she felt a new presence enter the facility. Someone whose mind felt like ice and calculation. Through a security camera, she saw him. General Harrison, tall and gray-haired, watching the rescue operation with cold fury. "Target the witch," his voice echoed through speakers in the corridor. "Everything else is expendable." Elena felt the network's alarm as enhanced soldiers throughout the facility changed their priorities, converging on her location. But she also felt something else, a growing warmth as the freed supernatural beings began to add their strength to hers. James broke out of his cell in wolf form, joining Darius in the fight. Caitlin, still weak but determined, used her newly awakened abilities to shield Elena from gunfire. Tony emerged ready for battle, his transformation more controlled than Elena had ever seen it. "The others," Elena gasped, her power stretching to its limits as she reached for Rebecca in the next cell. "I have to free them all." But as she pressed her hands against Rebecca's door, Elena felt something new, a surge of power that wasn't coming from her own abilities or even from the psychic network. It was coming from Darius, flowing through their mate bond with an intensity that made her gasp. "Together," his voice said in her mind, and suddenly she understood. The mate bond wasn't just connecting them emotionally. It was allowing them to share abilities, to amplify each other's strengths. Elena's healing and connection powers flowed into Darius, while his alpha authority and supernatural strength flowed into her. Together, they reached out through the network to every captured supernatural being in the facility. The golden light of Elena's power, enhanced by Darius's alpha presence, broke through every mental control, shattered every artificial programming, and restored every stolen connection. Throughout the building, cages broke open and controlled minds cleared. The enhanced soldiers, suddenly facing dozens of angry supernatural beings instead of helpless prisoners, found themselves overwhelmed. But Harrison wasn't finished. "If I can't control them," his voice boomed through the facility's speakers, "then I'll destroy them all. Initiating sterilization protocol." Elena felt a chill of terror as she realized what that meant. Through the security cameras, she could see devices throughout the building beginning to glow with dangerous energy. Some kind of weapon designed to kill supernatural beings. "Everyone out," she shouted through the psychic network. "Now!" But even as the freed prisoners began evacuating, Elena knew they wouldn't make it in time. The weapons would activate in less than a minute, and there were still people trapped on the upper floors. "There's another way," Darius said quietly through their bond, "but you're not going to like it." Elena felt his plan through their connection, and her heart stopped. "No, absolutely not. Elena, listen to me. The mate bond makes us stronger, but it also makes us vulnerable. If something happens to you, I lose half my power. But if something happens to me, you become the anchor for everyone's survival." Elena finished, understanding flooding through her. "The network doesn't need me to maintain itself if you're powering it instead. I can absorb the weapon's energy, channel it through the alpha connection to protect everyone else. But Elena, the bond has to be voluntary on both sides. You have to choose to let me do this." Through their connection, Elena felt Darius's absolute certainty that this was the only way to save everyone. She also felt his love for her, his gratitude for the life they'd shared, however brief. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "Maybe there is," Darius agreed, "but we don't have time to find it." Elena looked around at the people they'd saved, James and Caitlin and Tony and Rebecca, all of them alive and free because she'd refused to give up on them. She thought about Mrs. Chen and Miguel, safe at home but connected to this network of protection she'd built. She thought about all the supernatural beings throughout the city who were depending on them to stop Harrison's operation, and she made the hardest decision of her life. "Do it," she whispered. But as Darius began to gather the network's power into himself, preparing to shield everyone from Harrison's weapons, Elena made a decision of her own. The mate bond flowed both ways. If Darius could sacrifice himself to save everyone, then she could sacrifice herself to save him. As the weapons activated and deadly energy flooded through the facility, Elena threw every ounce of her power into the psychic network, not just her healing abilities or her connection magic, but her life force itself. She became the conduit, the filter,